I think the biggest threat to the dollar being used as a reserve currency is Bitcoin.
Michael Saylor announces another casual 15,000 Bitcoin purchase a day after releasing his masterful 3-minute presentation to the Microsoft board of directors on why they should adopt a Bitcoin strategy. Even with corporations and nation-states around the world waking up to the need to adopt Bitcoin, why do so many otherwise smart people continue to underestimate it? Another week and another aggressive Bitcoin purchase announcement from Michael Saylor and his company MicroStrategy, who announced yesterday they bought an additional 15,400 Bitcoin for $1.5 billion at an average price of $95,876 per coin. This brings the Bitcoin behemoth's holdings to 402,100 Bitcoin, which is getting closer to 2% of the entire Bitcoin supply that will ever exist. MicroStrategy is eating through the $42 billion worth of capital they've raised to buy Bitcoin extremely fast. And at this rate, they could get dangerously close to acquiring 1 million coins by the end of the first quarter of 2025. Saylor also released his 3-minute presentation to the Microsoft board of directors on why they should adopt a Bitcoin strategy. The board is deciding on a vote in a December 10th meeting whether or not to put Bitcoin on their massive balance sheet. Saylor's presentation is a masterful feat in condensing so much information in such a short amount of time. Here it is in full.
Microsoft can't afford to miss the next technology wave, and Bitcoin is that wave. Bitcoin represents the greatest digital transformation of the 21st century. It represents digital capital. The global wealth is distributed across assets that provide utility and others that preserve capital. But risk is destroying trillions of dollars of that capital every single year, and investors are turning to digital capital in the form of Bitcoin in order to avoid that risk. Digital capital is economically and technically superior to physical capital, and it represents a revolutionary advance in capital preservation. The asset class itself is growing from trillions to hundreds of trillions of dollars, and it is backed by digital power along with political and economic power. It makes sense for Microsoft to be powered by digital capital. Bitcoin's the best asset you can own. The numbers speak for themselves. It makes a lot more sense to buy Bitcoin than to buy your own stock back or to hold Bitcoin rather than holding bonds. If you're going to outperform, you're going to need Bitcoin. And those bonds are undermining your options market and your equity liquidity. Luckily, you have an alternative. Public support for Bitcoin is surging, as is political support, as is support for the U.S. Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, as is Wall Street support. And the President of the United States says,
never sell your Bitcoin.
That's why we're entering year one of the crypto renaissance. And you have a choice to make. Cling to the past or embrace the future. Divest billions of dollars and slow your growth rate. Invest billions of dollars and accelerate your growth rate. You've surrendered hundreds of billions of dollars of capital over the past 5 years, and you've just amplified the risks that your own shareholders face. If you want to escape that vicious cycle, you're going to need an asset without counterparty risk. What if you could buy a $100 billion company growing faster than Microsoft for 1 times revenue? What if you could keep doing it every single year? It's time for Microsoft to evaluate its Bitcoin strategic options. We've created an open source model. You can plug in your own assumptions. You can convert your cash flows and your dividends and your buybacks and your debt into Bitcoin. If you do that, you'll add hundreds of dollars to the stock price. You can create trillions of dollars of enterprise value. You can strip away risk from your shareholders, and you can prosper on the Bitcoin standard. So do the right thing for the world and adopt Bitcoin.
I thought Saylor absolutely nailed this. The slides go by so quickly that it's almost a troll to the Microsoft brass for only giving him 3 measly minutes. Still, I can't see why his company's performance since adopting this strategy and the arguments he makes doesn't perk the ears of the Microsoft board and make them seriously consider this. Saylor's been busy. He was also on CNBC this morning talking about why Bitcoin's volatility is a good thing rather than something to fear.
So Bitcoin's unique in the history of the capital markets. It's the first scarcity commodity, outperforming the S&P, more volatile than the S&P, that you can put on your balance sheet.
Volatility at sometimes is not always a good thing. I mean, it's great when something's going higher. But don't think that there'll be a drop or a significant drop that comes along? Have we moved past that because of the regulatory changes that have taken place?
I think it'll remain volatile because it's a 24/7, 365 global asset. You can panic sell it on Saturday night. You can enthusiastically buy it on Sunday morning. That's a feature. That's not a bug.
Yeah, you've lived through some of the swings, but do you think we won't see the downturns like we've seen in the past just because of the changes we've seen?
I think it's going to surge through the roof, and then it's going to surge to 180 and crash to 140, and people will be freaking out about it again. But let me make this one analogy. Volatility is like fire, and some people run away from the fire, but Henry Ford put the fire into a carriage via an engine, created an entire industry, and he gave humanity wings.
That fire analogy had the CNBC anchors speechless. Absolutely love to see it. And this seems to happen a lot to Saylor. People hear him evangelize about Bitcoin and their eyes glaze over. The fact remains, it's extremely hard to get people to see such a paradigm shift. If you haven't done the work, you frankly just sound a little bit crazy. James Lavish was on Fox Business yesterday, and he was asked by Charles Payne about the Bitcoin critics and why so many continue to dismiss it and underestimate it.
But there are some critics out there, and I mean some really smart people, right? I saw where you replied to a post, Steve Hanke, I think, really smart, very successful guy. He's been on this show where he's got this sort of cartoon. And, highly speculative, comparing it to the Mississippi Company, one of the most famous bubbles in history. What do you think folks like that are missing?
I think that the ego sometimes betrays you. I dismissed it twice in my career, Charles, and I've been on Wall Street for a long time, for 30 years. And I just outright dismissed it. I didn't do the work. And I think a lot of these people are either not doing the work or refusing to admit that they're wrong. I mean, the reality is that Bitcoin is extremely a rapidly growing network that's operated continuously since 2013, processed over 1 billion transactions, maintaining over 11 years of uninterrupted service. The network is secured by 175 terawatt hours of power per year. That's the equivalent of 20 nuclear reactors running continuously. So if you just put it simply, the Bitcoin network is a fortress of digital power that's nation-state level resistant and growing stronger every day. And that's why we're invested in it. That's why we started the fund, and we see tremendous opportunity around the ecosystem and the opportunities in Bitcoin in the future.
The Bitcoin network is a fortress of digital power that is nation-state level resistant and growing stronger every day. That is a fire quote. This idea that Bitcoin is an unstoppable fortress of digital power is not very well recognized today. In a world where it's just now being adopted on a corporate and institutional level as a legitimate financial asset, the global macroeconomic scale of it as a viable globally dominant form of money is much less discussed and understood. James Siegel, who is an economist and a professor of finance at the University of Pennsylvania, seems to get it. He was on CNBC yesterday mostly talking about the incoming Trump administration's effect on the stock market, but he took an opportunity to mention his thoughts on Bitcoin as a threat to the world's reserve currency status.
I'd also like to comment on, this recent Trump tweet, if you would want to call it, about 100% tariffs on the BRIC countries if they start a new currency. I find that really curious because really I think the biggest threat to the dollar being used as a reserve currency is Bitcoin, which we all hear, Trump is a big supporter of. So it seems a little bit strange to tell them don't produce an alternative reserve currency when really Bitcoin is, being talked about by many countries in the world as their alternative currency, some of them getting rid of gold and going into Bitcoin. So I'm a little curious on how that's going to play itself out once we hear all the details.
So Siegel finds it strange that Trump is eyeing tariffs on the BRICS nations for their plans for a new currency to bypass the US dollar, while being a strong proponent of the real threat, Bitcoin. But in reality, world leaders just aren't seeing Bitcoin as a viable threat. Yet. As I said, it's just now being legitimized as an attractive and high-powered financial instrument, and it's being completely overlooked for what it really is. The institutions like BlackRock and corporations like MicroStrategy are wheeling the horse into the city gates as we speak. Everything is going as planned, and the next stage in adoption beyond traditional finance is nation-states waking up to what this thing really is. And this is very likely already starting to happen. And that's why it's so important to understand what our friend James Lavish pointed out. Bitcoin is a fortress of digital power that is already nation-state level resistant and growing stronger by the day. So by the time the US government or China or Russia or the EU catches on, it's already far too late to do anything about it or stop it. The only thing they can do is adopt it. So you can front-run nation-states today with Swan. Visit swan.com or download the app by searching for Swan Bitcoin in the App Store. Swan has the fastest onboarding experience in the industry. You go from sign-up to buying Bitcoin in minutes. Plus, your first $10,000 in Bitcoin purchases will have zero fees. Visit swan.com to buy a piece of the nation-state resistant digital fortress that is Bitcoin. That's it for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel for more high-signal Bitcoin content. Thanks for watching, and remember, TikTok next block.